Again, thank you folks for joining us this evening, and hope everybody's doing well during the wonderful COVID times. I'm Brian Liverman with the Northern Virginia Tableau User Group. That was Sebastian. We have Patrick on the line as well as your co-leaders of the group. We have a full agenda, so I'm going to try to talk less and move along here and get things going. We have a couple of presentations from a variety of folks on the call, and we'll jump into them in just a moment. Our first presentation will be from CJ Dunn, who is one of our Tableau Nova Group members, and he'll be doing a presentation on the dashboard that he's created and some of the things he's learned throughout his time and experience in using Tableau. And then we'll turn the presentation over to the data meaning group, who have a couple different speakers to go through and show some presentations on their end. And after that, we'll jump over to MongoDB for the same thing. They've got some presentations ready for us as well. After each presentation, we'll try to leave some time for question and answers. Feel free to send questions throughout the presentation. We'll possibly answer them as the presenters are going, or if not, stop at the end of that presentation and have them try to answer it. So without further ado, let me go ahead and actually, Sebastian, did you want to add anything at this point, or Patrick?
Yeah, just real quick, I think we're now in the fourth round in for our local Tableau user group, and we're always trying to keep it as engaging and exciting as possible. So if anyone in the audience has any ideas, we're very open and happy to take those on. So if you're eager to present in one of those sessions that are coming up, please feel free to reach out to myself, Brian, or Patrick, either through here or through LinkedIn. You can find us there as well. We also have a home for the Northern Virginia Tableau user group that you can find on LinkedIn as well. So there's all the means that allow you to connect with us. And if you have ideas, please bring them forward. We also normally have the opportunity for you to present if you have any opportunities within your organization. We understand that during the COVID times, many of the participants may go through some struggling times in finding new work or exciting opportunities. So if you have anything available for the community members, or if you are seeking actively, please reach out to us, speak up, send us an email, go on the LinkedIn page. We definitely want to make sure that we serve up the needs of the community with all we're doing.
Thank you, Sebastian. So again, it's CJ, and then data meaning, MongoDB, and so forth. So let me scoot forward here to, or at least screen here with the folks that are going to be on the call that you'll see, and we've got a little bit of feedback. So hopefully, if you're speaking, if you can not speaking, if you can mute, that would be great. Or perhaps on my end.
Pat, do you hear me?
I do hear you. Now I don't hear you. Okay, well, why don't we jump in? If I can go ahead, I will stop presenting my slide here, and I will get over to the presentation for CJ Dunn. So I should pause my sharing here, and let me wait for the WebEx to pop back up. I apologize, it seems to disappear on me. And I will hand this over to CJ. And CJ, if you want to start presenting and speaking, we'll let you go ahead and start doing your thing. So thank you so much.
Sure. So, hey, everybody, I'm CJ Dunn. I figured for my first foray into presenting to the group, I would stick with the exploratory dashboard, just as Brian mentioned, getting into some Tableau storytelling. I'm just going to apologize in advance for two things. In the first place, I've got a cold, so I'm pretty sure my voice sounds disgusting. And in the second place, if you're not into baseball, I'm going to probably put you to sleep. But bear with me, and we'll walk through this. And if there's any questions, concerns, thoughts as I'm going through, just feel free to interrupt. I'm always open. So in the first place, I just created a visual summary screen just to show you how bad my favorite team truly is. And you can see a runs and runs against differential up here, along with 3 critical statistics. So you can just see how far the team lags behind the rest of the AL East. And again, This is baseball specific, but the AL East are the Yankees, the Red Sox, some of the most money spent in baseball, and it's generally considered to be the most competitive division. So it's just not great for the rest of us. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going. If you want to interrupt, feel free. If I'm going too fast, just let me know. Okay, so this is screen one. Screen two, I got into some quasi-spark lines here, just laying out some basic statistics so you can see the trends in the team's performance. Your typical, high-level statistics, wins per season, and the runs against differential, on base percentage, slugging, batting average, how much the team is striking out, hitting home runs, or stealing bases. And then I just, I generally, when I'm showing a timeline, a trend line, I will include the percentage change from the previous season or whatever the actual time increment is. Okay, moving right along, same concept, just on the pitching fielding side, wins per season, runs against differential is sitting up at the top because I think it just adds context to the rest of the statistics. But you can see an earned run average trend, errors, how much the team is actually striking out other batters, fielding percentage, shutouts, and home runs allowed. Of course, as I'm talking through this, I'm thinking to myself that a data dictionary would have been helpful here. But for those who don't know, shutouts are when you pitch to the team, the opposite team doesn't score any runs. Okay. Moving right along. This is your American League East rankings over the. And I failed to mention this. I took for our data set here just the last 20 years. So the last 20 complete seasons, 2000 to 2019. So you can see here it lays out year by year where each team sat as far as rankings within the AL East division. So you can see here, once again, I'm an Orioles fan and I'm telling a pretty depressing story here. A lot of red, a lot of gray. A little bit of a blip here, which is the only year they won the division in the last 20. And other than that, it's a pretty sad story. On-base percentage is lower, typically lower than the rest of the division, and ERA is generally at the bottom. And then you can see that overall, over time, what the average, the 20-year average is for that statistic, and then where the Orioles ranking was in the AL East. There are 5 teams in the AL East division. Okay, and then I realized, Brian, you gave me a half hour for this, and I think I've completed half my presentation in about 2.5 minutes.
No worries. If we have questions, we can go through and answer the questions and take a look at it. It's fine. I'm rooting for the Nats, so sorry I have to root against the Orioles, although I think
that's the easier thing
they've traded games recently, I think.
Hey, I'll take the little wins where I can get them. So this is just a basic look at attendance. You can see by team, this is for home games, what their attendance is. Tampa Bay is obviously just a terrible baseball market, even though they have generally outperformed the Orioles on the baseball diamond. Their attendance is typically much, much lower. But you can see here the 20-year average, and you can see, here's where we had Cal Ripken, and then it goes down, and then here's where we start winning some games. And then it drops precipitously from there because we are at the bottom of the entire major league as a whole, not just our division. Okay. And then I decided to finally embrace the density charts. I had not found an occasion to really use those just yet. So you can see along the two, really what I consider to be the two critical pitching related statistics, earned run average at the bottom, and walks and hits per inning pitched. In other words, how many batters is each pitcher letting on base within an inning? I won't belabor the bloody details here, but you can see where each, and I should say this level of data here is pitcher and season. So pitcher year. So you can have, if a pitcher pitched for the team for 10 years, they will be represented by 10 data points here. So you can just get a general sense of, your sweet spot here is in this quadrant between WHIP and ERA 1 and 2, between 1 and 2. And each of those teams seems to have some presence within that quadrant, except for mine, which is it sits comfortably outside that region.
That's sad. We're sorry.
Camden Yards is the best stadium in baseball, though, so that allays my anguish a little bit. And then last, wrapping up here, just getting into a general look at on-base percentage, how much the Orioles are getting on base when they bat, and how many runs they're surrendering per game. You can see, you break it out by average reference lines, nothing too exotic there. And then you can see the quadrant obviously is going to be your best up here and your worst down here, and your worst to the worst sitting comfortably right here. And I decided to just create a little Tableau animation here to show some of wins. And you can see here, I'll even speed it up a little bit. You can see here, Orioles in Tampa Bay switch off, and then that's where they stay. So that's my story about the Baltimore Orioles in their last 20 years. I feel like I flew through that. Like I said, I stayed a little bit conservative for my first presentation, but this is a general exploratory dashboard.
No worries, that was good. Hang on. Sorry, I got some background noise. Can you go back through maybe to the density charts that you built and maybe speak to how you put those together and some details on how that was created?
Sure. So for most of this, I used a pretty high-level data set. Each row represents one team per season, and then it just lays out the aggregations for those statistics for that team for that season. I found a more granular data set that gives you per pitcher per season. So each one of these represents one pitcher per season. So you can see here, I don't know everybody's names here, but I believe this is Jeremy Hellickson and so on in the year 2017. So you can see, in this case, his walks and hits per innings pitched was 1.280, and his ERA was 7.0, which is pretty dismal. I mean, you can see we have an outlier out here in 2006. But yeah, so that's most of this data, most of this Tableau dashboard, or I should say workbook, was put together with a pretty high level data set. This I dipped down a little bit and found one that was at a more granular level, pitcher per season. Does that make sense? Brian, would you like me to open up one of these charts?
That was, yeah, if you want to go ahead and do that, that's fine.
Yeah, I would like to take a look at the data as well. That's very interesting. Excellent way to present that. So if we can take a look at the data and see how that's being plotted, that would help out, along with the scatter plot you said.
Sure. So so I was getting some feedback. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I think unfortunately, Patrick, when you're speaking, it's messing up the sound for some reason. Just might be how you're connected. But thank you for the question. It was a good one.
So I'd mentioned the teams data. Now there's a gentleman named Sean Lehman, and he basically creates and maintains these baseball statistics, which is great. And every year he releases a new data set. I don't think he's going to have a lot for us this coming year, but you can either get this in R, you can get this in just a basic CSV format. You can download the MySQL create table statements. In this particular case, I just pulled down a couple CSVs and just did a typical join, a left join between Tableau and a franchise table. I don't know where that's not showing up. So I downloaded these as CSVs, kept it pretty simple, joined it in Tableau. I did do some work in R as well, just putting together a SQL query, but then I found some incomplete data within the data set on their side. So I abandoned that, but I think as I develop this out more, I'm going to replace what I have with a more comprehensive data set, and you can just see, actually Layman actually has an R package that you can pull down, and it's got the data loaded and actually has the data definitions embedded. But you can see here, I just brought up the SQL DF library and our package, and just started writing some SQL here to pull and organize the data. So once I get to a point where I can figure out why the data was incomplete within this R package, I'll likely replace what I have in this dashboard with just a comprehensive data set constructed in R.
That was very good. We did have a question if the presentation was available on Tableau Public, and I believe you were saying this is out on Tableau Public, correct?
It is out in Tableau Public, yeah. So
Okay.
you're going to get a little bit of how the sausage was made, but I will be happy to just add a link to the chat. It's funny, I've been working in this a little bit today, and I need to actually publish what I did so I don't lose it. But yeah, I'll be happy to send that link out.
CJ, I have a question as well. First of all, great work. That's really awesome to see, and the different insights into the details behind the sport. So you clearly took something that you're passionate about and, you know, utilize Tableau as a vehicle to communicate and get even more behind the sport. Could you maybe, for the folks on the phone, outline a little bit how you get started? You know, when did you had first the idea that, you know, wanted to use the data about your favorite sports team and visualize that with Tableau, and also maybe a little bit of an outlook of what are some of the things that you have planned on doing in the future? Are there maybe some hidden next projects already within the sports or within politics, or what are some of the next levels that increase your interest, and how are you planning on going about those?
Sure. Well, so what motivated me to do this, and I remember, Sebastian, I discussed this with you a little bit about a month ago. You know, full-time employee, and with 3 kids, you know, my spare time was tough to come by. So I had been planning to build out a Tableau Public portfolio for some time now. And, you know, the reason I picked this going in, this is my first real substantive dashboard that you'll find in my Tableau Public profile. I know this data, and you know, I follow the Orioles every year. I don't know why, but I know the data. I understand the statistics. You know, I grew up as you know, baseball's my favorite sport. Baseball's mostly really the only sport that I pay active attention to. So that's what motivated me to do this, was recognizing the need to construct a Tableau portfolio or Tableau Public portfolio, and going in really with my comfort zone. As far as what my next project is, it's going to be something completely different. And I already started working on it to a point where I almost pinged you last week, Brian, and said, hey, on second thought. And then I just figured for your sake and for mine, I would just stick to the scripts for now. But my next project is getting into, and this is even more esoteric than Orioles baseball. I'm a poli-sci geek as well. And one of the projects I started in the text analytics course I took was working through the Mosteller-Wallace project, which was, I believe, in the 1960s. That was Frederick Mosteller, who was the chair of the statistics department in Harvard. And I can't remember Wallace's first name or what his background is, but what they did was there are, within the Federalist Papers catalog, there are, I think, 12 Federalist Papers whose authorship is in question. Between Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. John Jay only wrote 5. That was it. He was done. But they signed all these papers Publius. And so generally you could figure out who wrote which one, but there are 12. I don't quote me on that. I think it's 12 papers that are in dispute. So you know, using some rudimentary text analytics, you know, the technology that was available in the 1960s, and really just basic statistical methods. Mosteller and Wallace determined the authorship, who they believed the authorship of the papers were, and what the probability of that was. Within this text analytics class that I was in, I took a 101 stab at it, and between Tableau and a program called Statistica, which I don't think anybody else uses, you know, I took it upon myself to check out the statistics chair at Harvard's work, and my conclusion I came to the same conclusion that he did. And so there was a pretty rudimentary stab at it. I'm going to continue my work on that. And actually, instead of using Statistica, I'm going to use R, because R and Statistica, you know, obviously blend very well together. So that's my next foray. Maybe I could present it to this group sometime. Yeah, that's what's next on the horizon for me, I think.
I think, CJ, the maybe has to be a definitely yes, you know, with all the excitement for all of those who have seen the musical, which was awesome, by the way. And connecting that again, something that's as fascinating as a theatrical presentation, and now diving into the data behind. I mean, that's fascinating. So sign me up for that one for sure.
All right, sounds good. I'm not sure I'll come close, but it won't be flat trying.
There need to be a couple rhymes in your presentation then for sure.
I'll find a way, trust me. But yeah, so that's it's great to be part of this group. Glad to present here. Like I said, it's a rudimentary exploratory dashboard, but it's just kind of like putting my typical aesthetic approach in front of folks. Sometimes I'm accused of being a little bit too minimalist. I actually had my wife look over my shoulder while I was putting this together, and she was just like, I don't know what this is. And I kind of explained the whole Sparkline concepts to her and everything else, but I'm not sure that helped. So I'm open to any and all feedback. And like I said, I'll be happy to put the link to this in the chat window, and feel free to explore what else is in my public profile, but it's a lot of work in progress stuff.
CJ, maybe one follow-up. I can't help, since you mentioned a typical situation, which probably a lot of folks are in right now, managing work and family, but still having a passion of wanting to get going with Tableau. Retrospectively, if you look back and clearly you had a success because you were able to take action and move it forward, what would you say were maybe the 2-3 things that you maybe had in mind before we said, I'm never going to get going, but actually turned out to be easier than what you thought it to be? So what are maybe the 2-3 recommendations for anybody who wants to get started and still, maybe procrastinates a little bit and pushes it ahead of themselves?
Sure. I mean, in the first place, which is near impossible for me, is try to find a quiet spot to work. Get a game plan together. I mean, it's like I knew that this was going to be my first foray into creating a Tableau public workbook, because I know this data. It's something I'm passionate about. With the baseball season being postponed months as it was, I was actually really missing baseball anyway. But my best advice would be have a clear idea, at least at a general level. You don't have to get down into the nitty-gritty in the very beginning, but just have a general idea what story you want to tell or what problem you want to examine, and then familiarize yourself with the data. Try to find the best sources for it. I mean, there is a ton of baseball data out there, and I found that a lot of it was noise. So that's still a work in progress for me, because I want to find a data set that actually gets down to a much more granular level and shows individual pitches. So yeah, I mean, my best advice is try to sequester yourself as best you can. It's a little tough for those of us with kids, and we're all homebound. Have a general idea of what problem you want to address, or what question you want to answer, or what story you want to tell, and then do your research on finding the best source for data for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, CJ.
And that's great information. Thank you, CJ, for your presentation. I thought it was fantastic. I will definitely be digging more into the link and looking at the data so I can learn myself more. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can take the presentation back from you, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, let me
find myself. There we go.
There we go.
Yep. So bear with me, folks. I'm trying to remember my lovely skills for presenting. Oops. So bear with me. There we go. Can get my computer to cooperate. So fortunately, it's going back to the very beginning of the presentation. But we will now move to our Friends with Data meeting and have them take over for the presentation. I will turn that over to either Devin and Katie if they want to do introductions of Andrew and Tessa, or whatever direction you want to go, let me know, and I can hand that off to whomever and make you the presenter.
Sure. Yeah, I think Brian, if you want to shift it over to me, Andrew, it's I'll be doing the majority of the presenting, and then I'll throw it back to you when we're done.
Perfect. Hang on one second here. Drag this over to you. It will cooperate.
Cool.
Alrighty, so it should be coming over to you now.
Yep. Go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully, I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay, cool.
Yep.
So
We got you.
your screen should be very blue right about now. But let me go ahead and move over this presenting screen here. Yeah, and then we can go ahead and just jump right into things. But yeah, thanks for joining today's session. So I'll be presenting here with Quest Diagnostics, and we'll get into that. But just wanted to welcome you guys to today's presentation hosted by Data Meaning and Quest Diagnostics. Today's session, we'll be primarily talking about effectively responding to emergency type situations that you may or may not find yourselves in. The main one, of course, being the global quarantine / COVID-19 pandemic that's basically affected literally everyone worldwide. So we'll be covering our responses, our personal responses to the pandemic here at Data Meaning and Quest, and the key takeaways that you can learn from based on our personal experiences. So essentially what went well, developing, maintaining the quarantine, etc. And what we might do differently if or when we find ourselves in a similar situation. And by similar situation, I don't necessarily mean like another quarantine or global pandemic, but just in general, what happens, like how do you essentially respond to emergency all hands on deck situations here. So without further ado, we can absolutely go ahead and move on to the next slide over. So before jumping into the main meat and potatoes, let's go ahead and take a look at a quick agenda here. So we've prepared for you guys today. We're going to run through some introductions here, introduce the wonderful presenters, the business case that we worked on, essentially the project and what we're essentially trying to solve, and of course the experiences, what you guys can take away, which includes topics such as how the dynamics of teamwork and managing expectations really change when inside of a pandemic sort of type of scenario, which will then set the stage for us to take a deeper look into really how that affected the processes relating to the data cleanup, data validation, the visuals, how did we build the dashboards, etc. We can absolutely dive into there when we get a chance. And of course, depending on time, we'll go ahead and open up the floor for any Q&A here at the end. But we do have a lot of content, so we can absolutely jump right into things. So let's take a moment here so you can meet of course, the fantastic, wonderful presenters and the team that worked on this COVID-19 project. So I'll go ahead and start us off. So my name is Andrew Kim. Work for a company called Data Meaning as a senior associate on the enablement team. My nickname on the team is OG. The reason being is because we actually have two Andrew Kims. Like, what are the chances that work at Data Meaning? So if you hear me called or reference myself as OG, that's why. I have experience on the Alteryx as well as Tableau side of things, Tableau side of the house, and specifically on Tableau, certified to teach the desktop courses by Tableau as well as Tableau Prep. A little bit about Data Meaning, essentially what or who we are. We're a boutique consultancy and a platform integrations partner. So essentially what that means is we work with a wide range of software companies such as Tableau, of course, Alteryx, Snowflake, Matillion, Informatica, just to name a few, to provide a wide range of services to our clients. So if you guys have any questions regarding that, so keep the that side of things short, feel free to reach out either during the presentation, supported here by the team. So if you post any questions in the chat, they'll be able to reach out to you, or feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We'll have some contact information then as well. Essentially, tagline, if it has to do with data, have you covered. Having said that, I'll go ahead and shift the virtual stage over to Tessa so that she can introduce herself and absolutely move over from there. So I'll go ahead and go on mute.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just turned on my video, so hopefully everyone can see. Thanks for that fantastic introduction, OG. And like he said, my name is Tessa Enns, and I am calling in today from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So thank you for having me at your virtual Virginia Tableau user group. I'm excited to present with OG and talk about the things that we did accomplish together during this pandemic environment and how we did that within a short time frame in navigating such an uncertain time, not always knowing what was going to happen or what would be thrown at our plate. But before we go into that, I'll do a little background about me. So I am not with Data Meaning. I am employed by Quest Diagnostics. Some of you may have heard of Quest from being in the news recently with working on the COVID-19 testing and whatnot. Others may have had work process with Quest Diagnostics and have had a personal experience with them. But for anyone on this call who doesn't know about Quest, we are in the healthcare diagnostic industry, and we process just about any specimen that you could think about that you would go to the doctor and have drawn, like blood work, even skin being drawn to be tested for cancer, and everything far in between can be tested at a laboratory of Quest Diagnostics and then processed and given back to a hospital or whatever customer had inquired about it. So Quest also has patient service centers that does its own in-house blood draws and specimen draws. And prior to COVID-19, that is the area that I was mostly involved with. So I am on the operations planning team, and I'm in the data analytics space. I work, I'm certified in Alteryx, and I just recently started working more in Tableau. I would say probably about a year I've been working in Tableau. I did my first Tableau conference in Vegas. When was that? No, that was last January, I believe, or last winter. Yeah, somewhere around that time. So I'm a little newer to the Tableau space, but I have more experience in Alteryx. So I was using those skills to bring together data so we could report back to the 2,000 plus patient service centers in Quest, all the managers and supervisors, and let them know how their operations were going, their wait times with their patients, the defect rate of specimens that were being collected, et cetera, and so on. But then COVID-19 hit, and my life went from working on the operations side of patient services to now working on the operations side of COVID-19. And I never saw that coming. So it kind of hit like a tornado for everybody, but my responsibilities were hit as well. And OG, I don't know if you're still sharing your screen, but I do not see the PowerPoint. You wanted to
Yeah, I think the hosting or
You know what? I apologize. I moved it away from you, Andrew, to
no worries.
Tessa. So let me move that back. I do apologize. Up there. Yep,
No
hold on.
worries.
There we go. That was my fault. Forgive me.
No worries.
Should be coming to you now.
Sweet. You go ahead and make sure I share the right screen. All right, cool. Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. So I can go ahead and move over to the next slide over
Sure.
to the business case. Cool.
Yeah, so now instead of working on these dashboards for patient service centers, the new business need on my desk became to work around to do the operations metrics for our COVID-19 testing in our laboratories. Specifically, my group was focusing on turnaround times. So from the moment that specimen hit our laboratory to the moment we sent out that result back to the hospital or wherever, how long was that taking, and then tracking that for priority 1 test, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4, and our general priority, and looking at that in a more detailed way as possible. So break it down as much as we could. So this dashboard, unlike my other projects that, I had a couple months to work on and get all the data really perfect, and then get the dashboard exactly how I wanted it and go live based on kind of my timeline. This was a 3 to 5 day turnaround, which I have never worked in this type of environment before. And I will say, had it not been for Data Meaning and the partnership that Quest has with Data Meaning, I don't believe that it would be possible because of the gaps that OG and his team and others were able to fill in and buffer for my lack of Tableau expertise. So those resources were absolutely critical, and being able to identify those resources, look out for those resources in my organization was absolutely the component to success in these high stress deliverables. And with that said, I will pass it back to, or no, let's go over the timeline now, right?
Yeah, so we can go ahead and jump right into, so just like you mentioned, go into the sort of the meat and potatoes, the experiences of our response to the pandemic here. And just like you mentioned, we can go ahead and jump right into the timeline. So really giving a scale and the scope of really how quickly things progressed from, I'll let you handle that, from March to all the way up until now. Like really quickly how things progress. So yeah, go ahead and shift it off to you.
What's so crazy, actually, when I was putting together this timeline, is that I really thought about it, that we have been in this state of a national pandemic for 5 months now, which seems absolutely crazy. I can't believe we've already been living like this for half a year, but we have, because March 11th is when COVID-19 was declared a national pandemic. Quest Diagnostics got thrown into the loop of that and was immediately identified as somebody, as a partner that was going to use our laboratory resources to help with the COVID-19 testing and stand up. So March 20th is about when my boss was getting involved in a lot of calls, and that's when I realized, okay, I'm eventually going to be called upon to do some work. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I have to get ready. So that is when I started doing daily stand-up calls with the data meaning group and some other team members that I will talk about in the next slide. These are at this point outside resources because our internal resources were completely tied up with capacity. The other two people on my team were setting up working with IT to set up data warehouses, because that is where their expertise came into play. We had IT completely from the ground up developing a data warehouse in laboratories specifically for COVID-19. We had the higher up management working with where we're going to get our supplies, how many COVID-19 tests were we going to be able to handle, what laboratories still need to get set up. And then we still had the element of how are we going to manage communication with the White House and getting them their results. So this was all happening internally, and I was not yet brought into the picture, but because my team was so absorbed in it and other internal resources in Quest were so absorbed in it, I knew my time was coming. So I was in the interim within that month preparing, foreshadowing, and having daily calls with and finding those resources, outside resources that are able to work with Quest. So then it happened. April 28th is when I had concrete projects to work on, concrete deliverables that needed to get done yesterday. So that's when OG and I started working together very, very closely with Tableau. And May 1st is when our first dashboard went live on the Quest internal Tableau server. So that was huge. And then since that time, we have made he's helped me with other dashboards, and we've been continuously improving and making tweaks and supporting these dashboards, but I'm not so much in the development phase anymore. That high stress period is pretty much simmered down.
Cool. So we can go ahead and now that we've gotten a chance to look at the timeline, we can jump over to the overall team. So even though Tessa and I are up here presenting our findings, that by no means means that we were the only individuals working on this project. So I'll go ahead and I'll let you present that side of things, Tessa. I'll speak towards like the team that really came together to make this project successful.
Yeah, so lastly, before I pass the speaking over to OG, I'll just go over the organization of the team. So like Andrew said, it was not just us, it was a bigger group effort. And I kind of saw myself as the liaison between the external resources and then my internal group that was working more heavily in the data and the strategy and data warehousing side of things. So I do think it's important to let you know how I got involved with data meaning. So at our company at Quest, we do have an Ultrix sales representative, and he was the one who actually told me about data meaning and that this resource was available at Quest. And if it weren't for him, I don't know how I would have found out. But my advice, I guess, to anyone on this call is if you are a larger corporation and you don't know who your Ultrix or Tableau sales reps are, but ask those questions and find out who they are, because that was really the catalyst for me finding this toolkit of external resources that I did not know about prior to speaking with him. So anyway, he got me on some calls with Data Meaning, and that's where I met Andrew Kim. So not OG, but AK. And we started talking about, foreshadowing what type of resources he has on his Data Meaning team and that I could take advantage of. And then I started foreshadowing what type of projects that might, and dashboards that might be useful to Quest right now, given the situation and what I know internally. And so with that, Andrew, AK, was kind of pulling in based on my needs that I was expressing and foreshadowing. He was able to say, okay, well, I have Jackson and I have OG who are Tableau experts, and there was other people who came into play here and there to give some external data like population and other data packages that he was able to help support me with based on what I was communicating in those daily stand-up calls. There was another Ultrix ace on the call, Mark Frisch, and then Marie, who is also an Ultrix expert, specifically in the time series analysis. And they came into play because Ultrix did a lot of the heavy lifting for Tableau. A lot of the back-end data work was still being done in Ultrix, and Mark and Marie were really supportive in that element to help turn things over faster and just be on calls for if I got stuck with something, and they could really quickly help me get through that, similar to what OG and Jackson were helping me with in Tableau. And then my part was really just the communicator and really just kind of knowing the bigger vision and knowing what my boss needed, knowing what Quest needed, and how fast we needed it. So that was the team in a nutshell. And I'm going to hand it back to OG now.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely takes a village. So having said that, now that we've had a chance to take a look at the general team here that came together to work on everything, let's really dive a bit deeper into that aspect of teamwork and expectations management and how that sort of changes when you're working in that pandemic environment. So sort of how things changed, right? Just to set the stage here, right? As Tessa mentioned, we were sort of a mixed bag of individuals, really. A good majority of us never really worked with each other before. Me personally, AK's my manager, so he just, one day was like, hey, are you free? Do you have some time to work with Tessa at Quest? And I was like, I guess I have some time. And that's sort of like how, that was like as just how easy that relationship sort of started there. And I had previously never worked with, Mark, Tessa, Bree, the other individuals outside of the individuals that I had worked with at Data Meeting. That sort of led itself towards a meeting style where we had really highly individualized meetings. So not everyone was present. And what that really meant was the meeting style sort of shifted towards a more modularized, sort of hot swapped resource style of meeting management. So what that means is essentially looking at that second point, really bring only who you need, really invite only the resources that are necessary, and politely, in air quotes, drop the resources that are not necessarily needed on the calls. So what that necessarily means is there were, a couple of times, or a majority of the times on those calls, even though there were these individuals who were invited and they made sure that they cleared their calendars, Tessa, and rightfully so, Tessa essentially mentioned, I just need Mark, I just need OG, I just need to work on Alteryx, I just need to work on Tableau. It was really that laser focus that really helped the project to succeed. And where that lends itself to being useful is that it's a very efficient style of management, right? You only have the resources that you need. You're not wasting anybody's. You're attempting to limit the time wasted on sourcing these resources. However, on the flip side, right, when you're not on a sort of a pandemic, all hands on deck sort of emergency style scenario, you sacrifice everyone's understanding of the complete vision, which may be important, right? Even though we were all being brought together to work on a specific project, right, where we're working towards being able to build out these dashboards, it was very difficult to be able to see the entire vision, which is, a more traditional time permitting project, you would really want to be able to see that. However, moving forward, right, the topic of managing expectations was really key here. So that's not to say that when you're not in a pandemic scenario style, emergency meeting, right, that you don't manage expectations. That's of course extremely important, but it's doubly so whenever you're working in this type of environment. So what that really means in terms of the project that I was working with Tessa and Quest on was clearly outlining everyone's purpose and essentially what they'll be contributing. So even though I have personal experience on the Alteryx side of things, I by no means have nearly enough experience as aka the ACE on Data Meetings team, or Mark, who is also an ACE, right? That's sort of where Tessa sort of had to manage those expectations and say, all right, AK and Mark, they are going to be the ones that handle the Alteryx side of things. So unless we're working on Tableau, you don't need to be present on those calls. And once Tableau starts to join the fray, that's whenever OG, or me, that's whenever I'll join those meetings. Now, the final point there is that laser focus and prioritization. So outside of being able to manage the expectations, outside of being able to source the right individuals, it's really important to be able to say, all right, in this specific meeting, we are going to accomplish X, Y, and Z, right? Because regardless of whether or not you have the right individuals, if you're working on too many things at once, a lot of things can be lost in translation. So there are oftentimes in the very beginning of this hour and a half, 2-hour one-off working sessions for specific dashboards where Tessa would ask, I have these functionality asks that my manager wanted me to include in this new dashboard. These asks are X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, right? I'll go ahead and take those requests, internally sort of process, think about how long those asks are going to take, and say, all right, within the hour and a half, we can absolutely accomplish X, Y, and Z. That's only going to take, 15 to 30 minutes per ask, but A, B, and C, that's going to take maybe an hour, 2 hours. That doesn't necessarily mean that those asks aren't useful or absolutely necessary, but at the specific moment, if we want to be able to at least get something out of the door, we're going to have to shove those off to another release. And it's really that laser focus that leads to a timely and efficient development. But having said that, we'll go ahead and move over. That'll sort of tee us up now that you guys have an idea of how the team sort of worked and the expectation management side of things, leading us into the data. Really, how does that expectations management, how does that teamwork sort of affect how we make changes to the data, how we wrangle the data? So if you take a look at the screen here on the slide, we have sort of two sides of the slide. We have a perfect world as we sort of gravitate towards a perfect world, as we have infinite amount of time, infinite amount of budget, right? May not be the most feasible, but you have the point as we start to gravitate to those side, how does that affect how we make changes to the data? How does that affect how we really see the data? And of course, we have on the purple side here, going to the right side, the emergency response side of things, right? When we're in a pandemic scenario, an emergency scenario, how does that actually change the process in which we're working with the data? So in that perfect world scenario, right, the data can be assumed guilty until proven innocent. So what does that exactly mean, right? We can automate data checks. We essentially say the data that we source from the data warehouse team, not saying anything bad about people who are on the data warehouse team, but essentially when we receive it, it's not in a state that can automatically be used in these source systems, in Tableau, in Power BI, etc. Right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to massage the data to the point where it's essentially going to be perfect, and then we can start building out the dashboards, and then we can essentially work in sort of like the opposite of parallel. You start to gravitate away from working in parallel, massaging the data while developing a dashboard. You start to segment it as much as possible. So that means automating the data checks, perfecting the process, focusing on data integrity as a whole, signing it off, and then building the dashboards out. However, whenever you shift over to that emergency response side of things, that pandemic side of things, you really don't have the luxury of time to be able to do that. So when you're responding to these emergencies, you really have to trust the data, but with a skeptical mind. That doesn't necessarily mean that when you see nulls, you say, all right, that's perfect. Data's perfect, don't need to worry about it. You really need to make a note of that, and then at the very end of the process say, all right, we've developed this with the nulls in mind, but we're gonna go ahead and now fix everything at the very end. It allows you to work in parallel. You start to constrain the development process to be as close to each other as much as possible. One of the best practices that I always like to do, regardless in any project, is to eliminate unnecessary fields and calculations. So really sort of one of my favorite quotes, Gordon Ramsay, all of these cooks say this, keep your workstation as clean as possible. So what that means in Tableau, hide all unnecessary fields. Whenever you're creating your extracts, try to eliminate as much fluff as possible so you're just working with the data that you actually care about at that specific moment. It's not to say that data won't change. Data changes all the time, but it allows you to, and it lends itself to a much cleaner process. And that final point here at the very bottom, focus on the data integrity as needed. So what that means is, unless the data integrity is really, causing you to stop development, it's not allowing you to move forward. Essentially just shift off the changes to the very end. And as you start to hit those data blocks, literally the data is so bad that we can't develop anything. That's whenever you would step in and clean up the data there. But having said that, this sort of process, I think whenever Tessa and I were coming up with ideas in terms of this presentation, we were thinking of analogies to really describe the development process. And if you want to think about, one of the main ones we came up with is if you want to think about a baton pass in a sort of track meet, you can think of it as that, where you're handing off the baton from Alteryx to Tableau, except it's now being handled like a football, where you're passing it around back and forth from Alteryx to Tableau. You're working on the data, then you work on the dashboard. Dashboard breaks, you go back to the data, you massage it. And even though that sounds like sort of a hectic process, as you can see, April 28th, and then May, I think it was 11th or May, whatever the date was a really, constrained timeline. So it really lended itself to be an effective process there. But having said that, I'll go ahead and jump over and let the virtual stage open up to Tessa so she can speak about the actual dashboard that we built inside of Tableau.
Yeah, thank you, OG. I want to add something real quick to what we're talking about before I jump into this, and that is that although the data integrity we didn't have time to focus on that, it was basically handled by a different party. So I had my two coworkers on my internal team who I said were working more with IT and the data warehousing and setting up the back end. And what was nice about that was that it did allow me to say, okay, you know what, it's not on me to focus on the data integrity. It's all right now, we just need to work on development. And then after the development was made, then it went through another check with my two coworkers who were able to solidify, yes, this integrity is upheld, or no, we need to check something. And when OG and I were discussing what went well in the development in such a short time frame, we did mention that being able to diversify that. So if you're the developer, you just focus on developing. And if you're able to do that in your role, I think we found it to be very successful, because it's sometimes hard to navigate back and forth between okay, I need to make sure these numbers are correct, or second guess these numbers, or distrust these numbers, and then in the development mindset as well. So if you can separate that as much as possible, it allows you to stay laser focused even more, which was very helpful for the development in that really quick turnaround time that we were working under. So back to this slide. So unfortunately, I cannot show the actual dashboards, and maybe later, at a later time I can, but I have to work with the legal department first before I can show anything. So I just put together this very, 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 very like pared down, stripped down, like just to give an idea of one of the dashboards that we made. And this dashboard happened to be the simplest. Nothing fancy about it at all. Really, all of the glitz went into the development of it, but the display of it was super simple. It was probably one of the most basic like type of visuals you could show. There's a KPI banner, there was a table that had red for bad, green for good, and then there was a line graph to show our turnaround times over time for each the trends for each priority. And I think what was trying to say this politely, I guess what was hard for me in this development was that this was the vision that my boss wanted. He drew it out on paper and he said, this is what we want. And that was a little harder for me to stomach. And I had to make that sacrifice of, I don't have time to offer my advice right now, or to offer my visual type of, expertise, I guess you could say, for vision. And I think a lot of us on the team had to make sacrifices in that regard as well. Like OG had to make sacrifices as far as me not being able to be totally up to speed with everything going on, and to just trust that this is what is being asked of right now, and this is what is going to be well received by the end users. And then I had to do the same thing with my boss. And I think that was one of the key takeaways from working in this rushed environment as well, is that you had to really let go of a lot of your pride, your ego, your any type of that human element that you might be looking for, and just think about the bigger picture and just stay focused on the end goal. So having said that, this simple dashboard, well, simple on the outside, complicated on the inside, is actually being used by the CEO of Quest Diagnostics, and it's being used to manage communication to outside resources that Quest needs to communicate COVID stuff to. So I guess moral of the story is, it really is about the data. You know, it's not always about like how fancy it looks. It really comes down to the end users and how they are going to respond to the information. So that's all I have on this, but I'm ready for questions unless OG, you have something that you want to add to this slide.
Yeah, so I think we have one last slide here. But you basically just kind of covered a majority of that content, which is, you know, swallowing the pride and kind of, you know, especially a person in your position where you're developing these, you are the developer, and that's also personally for me, an individual who likes to, you know, you look on Tableau Public, and you look at the Tableau gallery, and you look at these beautiful visuals, and you're just like, I want to be able to use that, but personally at work. And it's sometimes kind of hard to marry those two ideas together, which is the effectiveness of the dashboard versus the pretty, you know, what Tableau can actually offer. And at the end of the day, the sort of like that tagline, that the mantra that us personally at Data Meeting, the developers, the Tableau developers sort of live by is, you know, make it effective first and then make it pretty. You know, make it work and then put all the fluff in. And as you go into sort of on this screen, right, the goal is king, right? When you're responding to those emergencies, clearly define the goal, avoid the improvements until your first deliverable. And essentially what that sort of goes into is hold off on the nice to haves. Hold off on, you know, making these filters cascade because that could impact performance. You know, hold off on, you know, loading up the Roboto text font onto your dashboard and just use the Tableau original font for right now. You know, those nice to haves, those can wait, but the actual end analysis, that's something that you have to get that to market as quickly as possible versus, you know, that perfect world, which is, you know, as you gravitate towards having infinite time, infinite budget, you can absolutely, you know, have a bit of scope creep involved. You can start to have suggestions being sourced from the team, have a bit of directional change. But once you're in that pandemic response mode, it's the goal. You have to execute on it, and that's really it. But having said that, yeah, I think just to your point, I don't personally have anything else that we need to specifically go over. So we can absolutely have any questions, source any questions from the crowd here. I think we're coming up on time soon. I think we're at 6:40 is whenever the next presentation should start.
This is fine. That was a great presentation. I appreciate it. So I saw we had a couple questions on the Q&A side, and looks like those have been answered. If other folks have other questions they want to type on to the Q&A, feel free to do so. I think as host, I have control to open it up to folks, but
I can go ahead and shift the host privileges back over to you.
Yeah, oh, that's fine. Not a problem. So I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. That was a great presentation, and I'm sure your lives have been, especially Tessa, your lives have been interesting during this time. So a lot to go through. I guess I could show my video so it shows me. That would be good. But no, I appreciate it. If anybody has other questions, if you don't have them now or you think of them later, feel free to add them into the question and answer section or chat area, and we'll try to get to that. And thank you very much for providing your contact information there as well. I appreciate that. We'll have this, we're recording the presentation, we'll have it available, and we'll have that out there for folks to go back to and refer to if they need to and want to. And we'll also make it available on our LinkedIn page as well for folks to be able to get to it at any point. So if you guys are okay, all the presenters are okay with having that presentation out there, that's what we'll do. So I have our next presenters set up as the MongoDB people, and if you'll bear with me a second if I can get my screen to present again. And unfortunately, each time it does this, there we go. Hopefully you guys can see that. If maybe get a thumbs up from Andrew, perhaps, if he can see that. See my screen? Perfect, great, thank you. You're right in the middle of it. Let me see if I can move you out of the way there. So we have Matt here from MongoDB, and Matt, once I stop presenting here, I'll go back over, and for whatever reason, the WebEx screen seems to disappear every time I present. So let me stop sharing, and then it will pop back up here, and I will drag the ball over to you and let you take control, and you can present and start away. So thank you very much.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so first, I would just want to start off by saying thanks to everybody here at this Tableau user group, and especially Sebastian for inviting us to speak today. I really appreciate you all giving us some time to chat about MongoDB. Anyway, so my name is Matt Grogan. I'm a solutions architect here at Mongo. And what I wanted to talk about today is the way that MongoDB stores data with the MongoDB document model, how that's different from databases that you're probably accustomed to, especially interacting using Tableau with various relational databases, and how MongoDB handles those differences so that we can still effectively analyze data within Mongo using tools like Tableau. Now, feel free to ask questions in the chat. As we go along, I'll try and keep an eye on those questions scrolling by and tackle those as they come in. Otherwise, we'll have some time probably for a Q&A session at the end. All right, so I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about software developers. And bear with me with this because I promise I'm going to tie all this back to doing data analysis using Tableau. But essentially, the problem that MongoDB was originally built to solve is that of storing objects. So when you're building a piece of software as a developer, you're going to think of all of your data structures as being various objects. So for example, if we're building, say, a customer relation or relationship management system, we might have a customer object. And a customer could have a bunch of different addresses that they can be reached at. They could have several phone numbers associated with them. And within my code, I'm able to handle this rich object as one entity. However, when I go to persist that to a traditional relational database, I need to break up that object so that it fits within a traditional relational model. So I take my customer object, I run it through what's called an object relational mapping layer, and I end up breaking up that object into lots of different tables. And then every time I go to retrieve that object, I have to query all the different tables in my database that are related to that customer and reconstruct the object that I can use within my code. This presents a lot of overhead in two ways. One, there's the developer effort that goes into breaking apart and reconstructing these objects within the application itself. And then there's the performance overhead for the database itself. I'm sure for everybody here working in Tableau, if you've been connected to a relational database and you had to run a query that had tons and tons of joins, you probably noticed that it started to slow down a little bit. And that is certainly the drawback of having to break apart and reconstruct these objects every time we access them. And of course, the other problem is eventually we end up with a very complicated schema. If we take some entity that exists within the real world, once we start representing that entity within a relational model, we can end up with actually a pretty complex schema, even if the entity itself isn't all that complicated. So to avoid this problem, MongoDB stores data as JSON documents. And because JSON is a native object format, you can take an object that you're working with in your code and store it as an object. There's no need to transform it in any way. You can save the object into the database in its native format, and then when you retrieve it, it's ready to use. And what that actually looks like is something like this. So here I have a customer record. On the left, I have that record represented in the traditional relational model. And then over on the right, I have that record as it would exist in MongoDB. So looking over here on the left, we have our main customer table. A customer, as I mentioned, could have several addresses that they might be associated with. So people that have maybe multiple different houses that maybe they move seasonally or something like that. Maybe multiple customers could live at the same address. There's certainly no reason why that couldn't be the case. So we probably have a many-to-many relationship here. And then if we map our customers to different topics they might be interested in, because that is a many-to-many relationship in the schema, we have a third table for handling those joins. So essentially what we've done is we've taken a customer who might have a couple of addresses associated with them and some number of interests that we want to keep track of. And in order to represent that effectively within the relational world, we've needed 7 tables. And that's going to increase the complexity both for the developer and probably also ultimately for an analyst using Tableau. Now, what MongoDB would do, or the way that this data would be represented in MongoDB, is this JSON document over on the right. Here within a single record, within one collection, that's what we call tables in MongoDB is collections. We can store all the information that we need about this customer. So here we have the customer's name, the address or multiple addresses that they can be reached at. They can, of course, have several phone numbers. And we can essentially have various sub-objects that are related to our customer here or arrays of objects, like phone numbers and addresses that we can store all within one record. The benefit here is, of course, we don't have to split up the record into multiple tables, which is both going to reduce the complexity of our application and also help us with performance since there's no need to join this data back together every time we go to access it. Now, while this data structure is fantastic for developers, it does present potentially some problems for analysts trying to use Tableau or other BI tools, because most business intelligence tools are going to expect this relational model over on the left. And they're probably not going to be 100% sure what to do with this model over on the right, especially dealing with things like arrays or maybe even nested arrays within our data structure. How does Tableau unwind that, right, and turn it into something that's usable? So what we did at MongoDB is we developed the business intelligence connector. Essentially, this is a translation layer that sits between MongoDB and Tableau or any other BI tool, and essentially allows MongoDB to pretend to be a relational database. So let's take a look at a data set here, and we'll see the business intelligence connector in action, and we'll look at the way that it transforms our data set into something that's usable within Tableau. All right, so I'm going to jump into the MongoDB side first. By the way, what I'm looking at here is MongoDB Atlas. This is our hosted database as a service. Just a side note, there is a free tier, so if anybody wants to try this out, you're welcome to jump in and give it a try. I'll have the link at the end of the presentation. But within my MongoDB database, I have essentially a bunch of movie data that we put together. So data about various films that came out anywhere between like the 1890s and the present day. And if I look at my movies collection, which again is most similar to a table in the relational world, I'll see a bunch of these JSON documents, a bunch of these objects that we've stored in MongoDB. Here we go. So here we have our first film, and this is going to have a rich data structure associated with it because a movie could have several genres that it's associated with. It's also certainly going to have a lot of cast members, as well as some sub-objects. So maybe we pulled data about this movie from multiple different sources. So we pulled in data about this film from IMDb, but we've also pulled in data about this film from Rotten Tomatoes. And both of those are represented in our data set as objects that are going to have their own nested fields associated with them. Now, what I've done for this cluster is I've turned on the BI connector. And what the BI connector is going to do is it's actually going to run an analysis of all these documents. And based on the structure of the documents stored within MongoDB, it's going to create a virtual relational schema. So it's essentially going to let MongoDB pretend to be a relational database. And then we're going to be able to query it using the MySQL query syntax. So just about any query that you can run against MySQL, you're going to be able to run against MongoDB using the BI connector. So if I jump into Tableau here, we can take a look at the way that the BI connector has broken out this data. So over here on the left, I have my schema. So comments, that was there before. Movies, we saw that in the other view as well. But all of these items with underscores, movies cast, movies countries, movies directors, these are all representations of the movies documents and the arrays within those documents. So what's happened here is the BI connector has realized that there are several arrays that exist within movies, and it's broken those out as virtual tables that we can easily query within Tableau. So here I'm going to go ahead and grab a couple of fields, or a couple of tables rather, that I want to work with. So we'll look at movies, we'll get their cast and their genres. So here, if I look at movies, this is going to look very similar to the data structure that I saw looking at the MongoDB data natively. However, things like movies cast, anything that was created from those arrays, is going to have just an ID to map it back to my core movies object, all my cast members. And then it's also going to have a cast index number, just in case the order of those cast members was really important for my analysis. Then, of course, once I have my data selected, I can jump into my worksheet. Now, I am going to go ahead and admit here that I'm a bit of a novice when it comes to Tableau itself. I've only actually been working with Tableau for the first 7 days of my 14-day free trial. So maybe if I get myself in trouble, I can ask everybody here for a little bit of support. But I think I've got it figured out what I want to do. So here, now that I have all my movie data available within Tableau, I might want to ask some questions about the data set itself. And specifically, I want to learn a little bit more about movies that starred one of my favorite actors, Tom Hanks. So what I'll do is I'll grab my cast field. I'm going to use that as a filter. And we'll look specifically for Tom Hanks films. And then what I want to know about those films is maybe which Tom Hanks movie genres were most popular. So what I can do is grab a metric like perhaps my IMDb rating, as well as the genres for my various movies. Oh, and I probably want the average rather than the sum for this one here. So there we go. I can see the top rated Tom Hanks movies tended to be action movies, documentaries, and then the highest rated Tom Hanks movies are apparently war movies, which I guess that makes sense given that Tom Hanks starred in Saving Private Ryan back in 1998. I might also be interested in knowing if Tom Hanks has gotten better or worse at acting over time. So if I wanted to perhaps break out Tom Hanks's career year over year and see the relationship between the timeline and the performance of his individual movies amongst moviegoers who are providing those ratings, certainly I can do that here as well. Now again, the charts that I'm building here are relatively simple because I am a bit of a newbie with Tableau itself. But what I really wanted to highlight here by taking a look at this data set within Tableau is that once you've enabled the BI connector and use that to connect to MongoDB, working with MongoDB in Tableau is going to feel exactly like working with a relational database that you're probably already very familiar with working with through Tableau. All right, cool. So at this point, I want to go ahead and open it up to everybody for some questions here about MongoDB. I'm happy to dig into details about the BI connector and how it actually goes through and translates all this data. We can talk about Atlas and how to get connected to MongoDB if you want to give it a try. I'm really open to taking this conversation in any direction that the folks here are interested in going.
So if anybody has any additional questions and they want to drop those in the Q&A, we could do that. I do see where I can unmute all. I could take a chance here, and if someone wants to speak up, let's try that real quickly. I'm going to mute you back. And we're getting a little too much feedback there with unmuting everybody, so I don't want to catch anybody by surprise either. But it looks like perhaps if I can see that correctly, let me view all here. Looks like Suzanne may have had a question, although I think that was already answered previously. So again, if anybody's got any questions, go ahead and type in that Q&A or the chat section is fine. And I really appreciate the presentation. That was great. Do you have anything else you wanted to add or any other comments you wanted to make?
I had a question actually.
Right.
This Sebastian, first of all, thanks for taking the time and guiding the users through on this exciting journey of combining technology again with Tableau and the ability of what can be created by the both of them together. As you were basically getting started leveraging MongoDB, and of course you're a subject matter expert with Mongo and getting into the territory of leveraging Tableau as well, what were some of the learnings, and maybe also where do you see the biggest advantages when it comes to leveraging MongoDB in combination with Tableau?
Yeah, great question. So it's interesting because when I first joined MongoDB, the big hurdle for me was getting used to thinking of data in that document structure. Prior to joining Mongo, I was actually in the business intelligence world. I worked for a company called Logi Analytics, and I spent most of my time working with relational databases. And when I first joined MongoDB, that was of course the learning curve. Going back to Tableau, oddly enough, once I started trying to build charts and things against the BI connector, it's been about 2 years since I've been working quite a bit with in the relational world. So I ended up really having to get myself back into that mindset a little bit. Now, luckily for me, the getting started experience with Tableau is fantastic. It really guides you through as a new user, getting started with your first Tableau project and building some visualizations. Now, as far as when the BI connector would be most useful with MongoDB. So Mongo is typically going to be used as your transactional database. So the database that's backing your applications or collecting all your IoT data or something along those lines. It's a lot more rare for MongoDB to be used as a data warehouse. So for example, we wouldn't compete with like Snowflake, for example. So the real benefit to the BI connector is being able to do real-time reporting against MongoDB. Since chances are that if we want to report on Mongo as transactions happen within the database, we can use the BI connector and watch that data coming in real time, as opposed to having to wait for it to go through some ETL process to get into our data warehouse when then finally we can get to it with Tableau. Now, I was debating whether or not to bring this up because I was worried that I'd put everybody to sleep with a bunch of database architecture details here. But one thing that I did want to mention is that if you are watching data in MongoDB in real time, sometimes the fear when connecting your BI tools to your transactional database is that running a bunch of business intelligence focused queries is going to hurt the performance of the transactional system. And with a lot of databases, that is something to be very concerned about. However, MongoDB natively has the ability to replicate data between multiple nodes that we call a replica set. And what we can do is actually set up one of those nodes as our special analytics node, in a sense that it's going to replicate data in real time from the rest of the cluster. However, we've set it up so that it will only handle analytics workloads that are being thrown at it. It's not going to be involved in the transactional work that the rest of the cluster is doing. The benefit is that I can then take Tableau and put it in the hands of all the different analysts within my organization to tell them, run whatever query you want against MongoDB. And no matter how expensive a query they end up running against the database, I don't need to worry about there being a negative impact on the transactional system. Anyway, hopefully you all didn't mind getting a little bit more into database architecture there. I hope that wasn't a sleeping aid for anybody on the call here. But anyway,
for folks who would like to get started learning more about MongoDB, are there any opportunity for, you mentioned Tableau with a 2-week trial, are there any similar offers with MongoDB, or maybe individual users, or how would you position the technology overall? Is it more geared towards large enterprises, maybe smaller businesses, individual users that are playing around and trying to improve their data management skills? How would you position the offering of MongoDB?
Yeah, sure. So certainly MongoDB is something that's been used, all the way from folks who are just getting their startup off the ground, all the way to various large enterprises. So it's really something that's appropriate for use cases really across the board. MongoDB tends to really shine in a couple of cases, however. There is, of course, the benefit from a developer productivity standpoint, thanks to MongoDB's data model. But also, if I'm dealing with use cases where I'm going to have a substantial amount of data that I have to deal with, MongoDB can end up being really useful. The tricky thing about a relational database is that in order to scale a relational database, I essentially just have to keep putting it on better and better hardware until eventually I've got like DB2 on an IBM mainframe, and that's about as high as I can go as far as scaling up. Whereas MongoDB is designed to scale horizontally so that I can spread the workload across tons of different servers and continue to grow the database as my data set grows, even if I'm getting into terabytes and terabytes or really even petabytes of data that I need to manage. Now, as far as trying out MongoDB, if anybody here is interested in getting familiar with the database and taking a look at sort of a different way of representing data than you might have had a chance to work with before, a couple of ways to get started with it. If you go to mongodb.com/cloud, that will take you to Atlas, which is our fully managed database as a service offering. This is great because there's no setup you have to do. We spin up the database for you. You get a connection string and you're off and running. Alternatively, if you prefer a little bit more of a hands-on experience and are more of a DIY enthusiast when it comes to technology, you can check out MongoDB Community. That's the open source version of MongoDB. And of course, you can just download that at mongodb.com. So I'll stick around for a couple more questions until I run out of time here.
But well, this is good timing, so thank you. But yes, don't go away.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, so if you do think of questions later, or if you're interested in learning more about MongoDB, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn at MD Grogan, or you can message me at Twitter at Matt D. Grogan there. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, again, appreciate it. Great presentation. Appreciate your time and learned a lot here. So we'll definitely be back in touch for stuff. I don't know if, let me see if I can open this back up to the panelists. If any of the other else want to make any other comments, do a little sales pitch or anything for themselves as well, or anything in addition to what you've already done, you're welcome to. If anybody has other questions, I'm going to scroll back through here. I don't see any additional questions on the Q&A section unless I've missed them. So if other folks can take a look at that just to make sure. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for joining us. Appreciate all of the folks that did the presentations today. It was fantastic information. I know it was a lot of short turnaround time for most of you, so thank you very much. We're going to try to do these about every other month or so. We'll try to get our information out to folks quicker and more often, perhaps, so that you can have a good idea of what's coming up. We're going to start looking at doing a number of different ideas for presentations, as far as even have a more in-person involvement over virtually somehow to do that, and more good presentations like we've had today. We've also got some potential other speakers lined up, but if you guys that are on here now, or anybody else that's listening wants to be a speaker or has anybody else in mind, feel free to reach out to myself. I apologize, I did not add it to my part of the presentation screen, and I don't think, Sebastian, we had that on there. Let me just double check. Nope, we did not put that on there. So note to self, you can reach out to us via LinkedIn. So if you just look for Nova Tug on LinkedIn, if you're not already a member of the site, you can find us there. You can obviously look for Brian Liverman, and Sebastian's also on there as well. You can search for us and for any of the panelists that were on today. So anybody have anything else they wanted to add before we call it a night? That'll be right on time, because we aimed for 7 o'clock in, so I didn't think we were going to make it when we first started lining up everybody, but it looks like we turned out to have the right amount of time for everyone. Sebastian, Patrick, any other panelists?
Link to the group is in the chat for everyone who wants to join.
Great, thank you.
Take it from there, yeah.
Okay, so if you check chat, you can find the link to the group. Thank you again to all the presenters. I appreciate your time and all your work and effort. This was fantastic information. I've learned a lot. I always learn a lot, but I also probably get overwhelmed and need to go back and look at it again. So we'll have this presentation available in the next couple of days once Tableau finishes the recording for us. And if anybody needs to go back and review anything, you're welcome to do so. So unless anybody has anything else to add, I'm going to go be sad because I did just look up a little while ago and saw that the Caps lost their first game of the playoffs, so boo. But thank you again. Appreciate it. And panelists, I'll be back in touch with you separately, but thank you so much. Everybody have a great evening. Please stay safe and enjoy your summer. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Take care.
Bye-bye.